be in your new space. So I'm Lisa Guthrie. I'm the representative from New Kent County, serving as your chair this year. And I also work professionally as the executive director of the Virginia Transit Association. So anyway, glad to be here, and we'll do our own self-introductions because many of us haven't laid eyes on each other in at least 2 years. I think up to when you were chair, we had one in-person meeting when we were trying to come back from COVID, and then that was it. So Ken, why don't we start with you and go around?
Good afternoon, I'm Ken Lance. I'm staff to CTAC. I'm the mobility coordinator here at Plan RVA. I want to welcome you to our new headquarters, our new office here. A couple of things, just housekeeping wise. Restrooms, if you go out this door here to my left, they're just down the hall on the right. And I think we're validating parking for these folks.
We will. Everyone can see me when they leave and give me if you parked in the parking deck attached to this building, I can validate your parking.
And if you, as far as getting out of here, when you come out of the deck, you have to turn right on 5th Street. You come up here to 5th, if you go right on Hull and go a block to 4th, that will take you back back through the circle, the traffic circle, and back to 95 if you came that way.
Are there any bus routes that go down?
There is a bus
here?
route that runs across here. I'm not sure what the bus route number is. But
1A, 1B.
you stop right across the street. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Southern Railroad's right there, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. All right, Tony, haven't had a chance to meet you in person. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tony Williams. I'm the Mobility Program Manager at Senior Connections. And we recently relocated, and we're on Semmes Avenue. So we're actually, I drove from home, but we are probably 8 or 9 blocks from here to on Semmes. But it's a pleasure to be here. I supervise a 5310 grant for Senior Connections, and we provide transportation and transportation information referral to the whole planning district. Nice to see everybody.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Faith Walker. I'm the Executive Director for RVA Rapid Transit. We are a citizen-led group. We advocate for more buses, more places in the Richmond, Virginia area, dignified places for people to wait. And last but not least, we want to elevate riders' voices in transit planning and decision-making. I'm excited to be here with you today, and I'm representing Richmond City.
Hi, my name is Sarah Wisiger, and I'm with the League of Women Voters, Richmond Metro Area Chapter.
My name is Sid Kumar. I'm the digital media specialist at Plan RVA and I'm in tech. So.
How about you guys in the back? Yeah.
I'm Brandon Tyndall, Director of Bike Walk RVA.
I'm Sulabh Ariel, plan staff here at Plan RVA. I look at the long range transportation plan.
I'm Miles Bushing, also staff here at Plan RVA. I handle the TIP and the RSVP CMAC obligations.
I'm Victoria Higgins. I'm actually the alternate for Wyatt Gordon, who's usually in this space for VCN. We're a member organization. I'm with Chesapeake Climate Action Network.
I'm John Leonard with VCU.
Morning, Champ Early, Richmond Area Bicycle Association, and it's great to see everybody.
Michael Testerman, formerly with Virginia Association of Railway Patrons. They merged with Virginians for High-Speed Rail, so that's my connection now.
You might need to update that with all the paperwork with Janice. Okay, thank you.
Don Root, I'm alternate for the town of Ashland.
Upton Martin with the town of Ashland.
I am Janice Firestone with Plan RVA.
John.
I'm John East with Chamber RVA.
Okay, great. I think we have a few online.
So we'll go online, right?
Yes, okay. Let's see. Charles, why don't we start with you?
Charles Resnick, representing Hanover County.
Okay. Who else wants to jump in, Bob?
Hi, Bob Basham. I represent Goochland County.
Can't read the name.
Eric and Sarah.
Oh, that's Sarah. Okay. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah Erickson with the City of Richmond and also VCU's Alternative Transportation Coordinator.
Okay, great. Glad you could join us. All right, well, we are able to meet in person and hybrid, so that's nice to have the technology to do that. So anyway, let's take a look at our agenda. We have done the roll call, so I think we have a quorum.
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right, let's go on to approving the minutes.
Chairman,
Yes.
I was asked by Herbert Richwine to let folks know that he's trying to call in by phone. So he would be with us in spirit that way. And he said, play nicely in the sandbox.
Please do. Are we able to connect with him
We
by
haven't,
phone?
he has not joined the Zoom yet.
Okay.
So far, we just have the 3 remote participants, but
Okay.
I'll watch him. If he
Okay.
comes in,
Okay.
I'll let him over.
All right. All right, let's take a look at the minutes. We'll entertain a motion.
Go ahead, John.
I wasn't here, but I'll make a motion to approve them.
I will then. I move to accept the minutes.
All right, it's been moved. Seconded. All those in favor? indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I think we have somebody else, no? I heard something on the online.
I think that was just
voting,
the person
okay.
voting, yes.
All right, let's go on to today's agenda. Are there any additions to today's agenda? All right, let's go into the chair's report. I don't know if Chet is on he's coming in to do his part, if I should just go on into the memo about CTAC involvement.
In Chet's place, Miles Bushing was going to give a report to us.
Okay. All right, well, why don't I go ahead with the chair's report. First of all, I want to mention, last night, there was this forum that the Chamber and Plan RVA and the Community Foundation sponsored. Was anybody able to participate in this? That's good. Tomorrow, there's another opportunity to come together with the Transportation Forum. Do we have
I have a flyer
all
that,
right, let's pass that around.
well, it's actually a one-page summary.
Okay, may I have one, please? Tomorrow at Main Street Station, starting early in the morning, there's coffee and networking, I think from like 7:30 to 8. And then at 8, the program begins. This is brought to you by the TPO in partnership with Plan RVA and Chamber RVA. And this is talking about big transportation ideas. And there are, if you're able to attend that, they would like for you to register. It's free, but they do want to know who's coming. And they are providing, for those who register, parking passes. So you can just put this on your dashboard. So I hope a number of us will be able to participate.
Madam Chair, we have reached, we have exceeded our capacity and have had to close the
Oh,
registration, but I do believe
okay.
we have several CTAC members who have
Okay,
registered.
okay, very good. All right, if you have registered, be on the lookout for an email today that will have parking passes, okay? So the next thing, let's pass this up to, I have one of these. This is a memo that is going to require some discussion. Okay, this is a memo that Ken wrote to the RRTPO Executive Committee back at the end of January. And since Upton was chair of this committee, we have really focused on trying to involve more representation from the community, a broader, wider, more diverse participation, so that we are actually more active in our advisory capacity to the policy board. So our first order of business was to add more representatives from various communities to the CTAC, and we have done that. We added Senior Connections, we added RVA Rapid Transit. We've added a couple of others that aren't with us here today. We have a new representative from NAACP. We have a representative from City of Richmond, Office of Equitable Transit and Mobility. Hopefully they will join at some point today. But there have been a number of organizations that we've reached out to try to involve more of the formerly known as the EDAC community, elderly and disabled. So with Senior Connections, that brought you in on that. So that was our first order of business. And so we have talked about our desire to be more engaged in the planning process of the policy board. For those of us who have been around a long time on CTAC, we used to actually look into specific projects and make recommendations, and that kind of went away. But we now are looking at a new long-range plan and talking about more of an active role in that, as well as other ways to be more engaged. So I wanted you to see this memo that Ken wrote. And Ken, since you're the author of it, would you like to comment on it while people are looking over it?
Certainly. And for those of you who attended our last meeting, we went over this in some detail at the meeting, but essentially we identified and talked about 3 different ways that CTAC could be maybe more involved and engaged in some of our processes. The first one being our long-range transportation plan. It's very timely that we're getting ready to start on another plan that has a horizon year of 2050. So I think there's going to be some sort of ground floor opportunities for this committee to be involved in that process as we move forward. We're just getting started on that. So I hope that at key junctures, key milestones, we can bring information to this committee, give presentations to this committee, and ask for input from this group. So that will be an ongoing effort, and I'm thinking that given the fact that we only meet every other month, that we may end up doing a lot of this virtually, and maybe convening some special meetings, or just sending information out via email. So we'll work through that process. The second opportunity that I identified was just some of our public documents and processes. Excuse me. I think many of you are aware that we have documents such as our Unified Planning Work Program, our Transportation Improvement Program, Title VI Plan, and I'm going to make a concerted effort to see that this committee is consulted with and given an opportunity to review those documents when they're in a draft form. Again, because of timetables and so forth, it may be that we end up just sending this out via email and asking for a response back individually. If there are opportunities that we can bring the body together and have a discussion, we'll do that. But some of it may end up just being some individual give and take, if you will. And the third opportunity is that we are trying to get out more and more into the community at various public events and so forth. What I would like to propose to this group is that when we have some of those events, make you aware of it, and if a representative from this group is available to come and help staff our table, I think that would be a good opportunity for the public to be educated on what we do and what opportunities there are for lay people, for average citizens to be involved. So you as members of this group can, I think, better speak to that than anybody. And we do have a whole slate of different public events and gatherings that we're looking at. So as we develop that calendar, I want to make you aware of that, and perhaps we can ask for a volunteer or two to come on a Saturday or whatnot and to be part of it. I think most recently we were out at the Diamond for an event with the Flying Squirrels, so there are some upcoming things that we're doing in that vein.
And telephone town halls, we could
Yes,
get the
right.
technology for that.
Right.
Well, I think all of us have constituencies. Whether you represent a locality on the CTAC or you represent an organization, you have constituencies. And we've not expressly asked you to take ideas to your county or to your board of supervisors or whatnot, city council. But maybe we will going forward. Maybe there are some things that, that you can think about going back to your organizations and, using whatever tools you have, through email blasts and social media accounts and whatnot to get more people engaged. So this was discussed at last month's TPO Executive Committee, Policy Board Executive Committee. And they, I attended the Policy Board Committee, and it was brought up during the committee that the Executive Committee would like to invite the members of CTAC to come to their May meeting, which I believe is the 6th. Anyway, we can check that. So we would ask a couple of you to join with me at that meeting and talk about ways that we would like to be involved more in the process.
May 4th.
May 4th, okay, May 4th. So that's what I'd like to talk about today, are getting your thoughts, hearing from you about how we can do more advisory to the TPO from our connection with our constituencies. What do you want to see come of this? Because, you know, we've been wrestling with this for a number of years. Now let's figure out what we're asking for and figure out what we want to say to the policy. So why don't we open the floor? I see some people kind of looking blankly, but a lot of you probably have been holding on to some ideas for a while about how you'd like to be more involved than just, we've had some great speakers at the CTAC meetings. We probably have had more exposure to innovation and ideas out in the community and beyond than probably the policy board has had. So how can we use that perspective to more positively influence the decision-making going forward to represent the community better? So, Upton.
One aspect of, that we've discussed, not perhaps at length, is the fact that the CTAC chairperson is a member of the TPO, but a non-voting member. And my suggestion has been that the TPO board change that and make that position a voting position, which may not, you know, which would require that the chairman, because I think the TPO meets on a monthly basis, and we just meet every other month, which would ramp up the number of meetings that we would expect our chairperson to attend. But by becoming a voting member, it ramps up, perhaps hypothetically ramps up the influence that the TPO and others would see CTAC as having.
Well, the chair rotates among the localities.
Yes.
I think it's what, 15 localities? Anyway, it's.
Nine.
Okay. So it rotates around. So those of you who represent a locality may end up as chair. What are your thoughts about that? Champ?
Chairman, point of information on that, to change that, and I think it's an excellent idea. To change that, is that a charter change, or is that a simple vote on the part of the TPO, or what would be involved procedurally to make that happen?
I think it'd probably be a bylaws change, Champ.
Okay. No, I think that's a fantastic idea.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts from anybody? If you end up being the chair, are you willing to do that? Or at least share with the vice chair to accept that challenge to go to the meetings monthly?
Well, it could be the chair or the vice chair,
Yeah, right,
you know,
right.
which would spread the number of meetings out across the board.
Okay. Well, Upton, would you be willing to pose that to the policy board at this May 4th meeting?
That means another meeting I have.
Yes, it
Do as I say.
What did I say?
Oh, I suppose so, yes. I'll have to check my calendar.
Okay, all right.
Madam Chair.
Yes, John.
Can I ask a question? I'm wondering whether we as a committee have demonstrated the value of the input that we have enough to be going to the policy board and asking that. And the kind of outreach that we've just been talking about trying to do seems to me a way for us to do that. And so I'm you know, even though I think the idea has merit, I'm wondering if at this point it's premature. I mean, I suppose you can ask, and if they say yes, they say yes. But I'm a little concerned, and I've never actually talked to any of the policy board members to understand how they kind of view our committee.
Right.
And where they see what our role is, but I'm skeptical that necessarily what we do is viewed as such a substantial thing. Now, you've done a fair amount over the years, more directly with the policy board, so you may have a response to that and feel like there is enough influence and that it would be of value to them.
Well,
or champion.
Here's an idea. Would you pose the question and say, now, we have accepted the charge to be more engaged this year and to involve more of our community representation. We intend to come back to you next year this time and ask for bylaws change. I don't know, I mean, thoughts change.
Yeah, and John, I'll tell you with all due respect, I tell you, when I look around the table, both now and over the past 20 years, we have some experts in various areas of transportation that, in my opinion, rival or exceed the TPO. So I think there's a lot of value that we add, and we can really aid in that discussion. So I'm not hesitant at all in questioning what value this group brings.
All right. Okay, well, we'll stick with that then. Other thoughts? As far as our engagement in the long-range process. I think one thing I'd like to see us focus more on are the actual projects and the prioritization. We used to do that. I don't know that we really had all the information we need to make those choices, but I'd like to see more than just sitting, inviting to watch a procedure, watch a committee meeting or whatnot, or even in the room, to actually have some input on the projects being proposed.
We've had this discussion about the relevance of CTAC to the planning process going now over a number of years. I remember a relatively interesting and heated discussion with then TPO Chair Pat O'Bannon. And it was very, some of us who are a little bit older with the committee remember that. We've had very interesting presentations, but I'm not sure that the presentations that we have had directly relates to the kind of decisions that the TPO is making. So in order for us to become what many of us would like to see being a more relevant committee, we would be charged therefore to know more about, say, the planning and the projects that are involved in planning, short-term, long-term, et cetera, the things that TPO is actually making decisions on. We'd have to do our homework to add relevance. We are going back to our constituents and talking to them, or I guess we could call ourselves a republic. We are elected to represent our constituents. And therefore make some recommendations back based upon our knowledge of those types of projects. So I submit that it may be that our agenda be more directed towards the subject matter of the decisions that the TPO, the Plan RVA, is making, so we then could give relatively quick feedback back to them through our chairman, who then has been made a voting member.
Well,
And
the TAC
represents
takes
us
up
there.
some of that. The TAC itself, the technical advisory, takes up some of the aspects of it, but they lack the community engagement usually. So I think that's, there may be some advantage to getting a different perspective from us than from the technical advisory.
Right.
Other thoughts?
If I can say something, I would love to be more involved, and then I think it would increase engagement. And as we bring maybe new members, we could go over the best way to add value in providing those recommendations. I don't know if that sounds like something we could go over in terms of how to do community engagement and transfer that into valuable recommendations.
Right. I think that's a good focus for the coming year, is to focus on what we can do in community engagement to go to our nominating organization, be it a local government or nonprofit or whatever, and say, these are things I'm seeking input from you on, so we can voice our priorities at the table. And then CTAC can synthesize some of those and then articulate them at the policy board meetings. Okay, so that tells us that our focus for the next year, instead of random program presentations, will be more on community engagement and maybe having some communication and organizing presenters, as well as some meat of the business of the TPO, so we can analyze that, dissect that, vote on that before it goes, we bring those concerns back to the policy board. Okay. Those of you who aren't saying anything, it's because, are you new enough that you feel like you're just gonna not really know what our role is yet? I know some of us have had 20 years on this board, so we've seen some various versions, but I think that's our roots. That's what we need to get back to. Yes, Sarah.
I just have a question then on project selection criteria and the development of policies. I just wonder if, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of repeating something you already said, but I'm trying to picture that, because once the projects are kind of selected by the localities and you're just looking at them is one thing, but how the criteria is developed, I guess that, I feel like that's something we could have valuable.
Right, before it goes to a vote by the policy board. So we have to unwind that and not just review in our minutes what the policy board did, but what they're going to do. Maybe not even at their next meeting, but a little bit farther along. So we'll have an opportunity, meeting only every other month, to get ahead of that.
Well, a question on that then, Sarah, to your point, I mean, 10 years ago anyway, we would go in and make recommendations on the projects that went into the 6-year plan. And as I recall, that tended to get more analytical last go round, where there was an objective scoring process.
Right.
But you could still start to nominate projects for the front end of that pipeline. And this all changes, just like the V-Trans with the state. Every administration seems like that whole process changes. Does staff have any input on what that's gonna be like this time? Or, because we used to get those matrices and give influence directly on, well, let's fund this or that and how much we want here and there. Will that happen again, or is CTAC not gonna be able to do that moving forward?
We have the answer to that.
I know that's a tough question.
Yeah. So we need to talk with Chet about that.
I thought that was a very relevant process, and I felt like what we were saying was not just lip service or head nod. We were changing the course of the ship.
Okay, well, I think that's something for us to pursue. Thank you for your feedback, and stay tuned. For May 4th, definitely I need to Upton Anybody else want to attend as well and be a part of this proposal? How about you, Champ?
I'm out of town.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. We'll talk.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Madam Chair, before we
Yes.
leave that topic, there was mention made, I think Kim said that there'd already been an event at the Squirrels. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you, starting to think about what our role should be. Can you talk a little bit about what that was, who the audience was, what you all actually did, how you could see us playing a role, just so as we're thinking about it going forward?
I was not personally at the event, I don't know,
I can give a little
Okay,
bit.
Sid, thank
So
you.
we had a good crowd come in from various different localities. We set up a table right outside the ticket location, and then we had our giveaways, we had informational material, collateral, current projects. That's pretty much how we kind of engaged with our audience, and we also did a sponsor night with emergency management and had a whole dedicated night, and so we talked about Plan RVA, talked about emergency management as well too. And so we just been going in on, like, they have a dog day, so they bring dogs come in, so we had specific collateral and giveaways around that. So providing materials on the table, just so that they can attract certain people to the table, and we gave document bags with all the information in it, so that way they are carrying one bag with everything they need from us. So that's kind of been how our engagement has been, outside from social media, and if we go to other meetings, we talk about, and on social media itself, we put up pictures of engagement, things going on, as we were out there at the table, live on Twitter when we were at the event, things of that.
So this was an event, at least one of them was an event that was essentially something for dog, that
It was the
kind of-
night that they had a
Dog
yeah,
night.
dog
Dog
night
night.
that the squirrels had,
Squirrels.
and then we provided some stuff and everything.
I understand, it was just bringing dogs to something, but there was nothing to make that audience specifically focused on transportation, so you were having to kind of draw them in, get them engaged in it, and
A little
talk to them.
bit of that, but what we did was we announced a lot of our projects, so we put out booklets of our transportation projects, like the Connect RVA 2045, anything with a fall line, so that we let that be a bigger visual display to attract people in and tell them. And that's usually how I also start the conversation about these are the focus areas, this is where we're improving. And when we did the bicycle and pedestrian plan, that was our featured focus as well too, where we put out the actual plan. Right there, we've also featured maps on easels regarding of changes that are happening and things of that, and at the Cape Pasta Festival, we did that as well too. We talked about that.
So what's your assessment of what the interaction and interest was in a group that didn't start out being a transportation group, and you're trying to talk to them about transportation issues? How did that go? Was it successful? I'm just trying to think,
Sure.
as we're planning what we ought to be focused on.
It definitely became successful because it also, as a team, we had to understand on our language and how we were actually talking about Plan RVA. So we had a consistent messaging that was spread throughout our staff of introducing our agency and then diving right into the topics. And then we had representatives that were working in our transportation area, like Phil or anybody that were able to talk more about the project that we had featured on the table, which drew them in some more, because that's when we were actually talking about details, we're talking about things that are happening, involvements, partnerships and things of that drew more people to come in. And as we were getting more people, we went out and said, hey, did you hear about a new bicycle and pedestrian plan? Come learn about the safety. Or when kids were spinning the wheel, we talk to the parents about that, and so that they get some understanding. But putting words in a way that they can easily understand and not being too technical around it is what helped increase that engagement and successfully brought more and more people to our table.
Thank you.
Good point, and I think there's a number of us at CTAC that do community activities, and I'm gonna call on Dave, talk a little bit about, you all do a lot of things out in the community. You're there handing out things about transit, talking to people, what are your experiences on the bus? Are there activities or communications that you do where you could seek input from people that would give us some ideas about proposed projects? So not just about, transit, but let's hear your thoughts about, the long-range plan proposals.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I find meeting people where they are is the best option for things like this. TPO, RRTPO, all the acronyms is very intimidating even to myself. And so I think, again, definitely putting things in a way that people can understand in very simple language is very important. There's always opportunities to engage people. It's just that, are we committed to an investment in that? Because it takes dollars to do that. And what I mean by that is, if we're, especially communities that are often excluded from this process, communities of color, people who are disabled, people who are low income, it's not that they're not interested in it, they have lives. I mean, I have the privilege of being in this opportunity and knowing what's happening, but we have to take it to them. And it's gonna take an investment. And so I would consider us, if this is something that we're committed to, we have to be committed to investing dollars in it, and it has to be grassroots engagement. And so I always look at it as something where, yes, us going to games and things like that, there's always opportunities to engage, but we have to be a little bit more creative on implementing ourselves in communities like that, or with those folks who are not represented are. So I think we just need to be strategic about it. And those are the folks who are missing from that. So our engagement has to be catered directly to those groups. So those are my thoughts.
Maybe the staff here, don't we have a coordinator now?
We do.
Maybe getting the coordinator to talk to you
Right,
about it,
right.
or with Kelly, with City of Richmond, some other ideas that might be possible, like they were doing the taco truck on Connect RVA, and some things like that to try to amplify those efforts instead of just saying, well, we put it up on Facebook and, we posted it, and, we know that that's not getting to the right audience. Other ideas? Okay, hope you all gonna ponder that. We're gonna be revisiting this topic quite a bit, okay? All right, let's see, getting back onto the agenda. Now we'll go to, who did you say was going to do the?
Miles Bushing is going to do.
Miles, okay, would you like to do the,
item 5.
TPO updates, please?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Miles Bushing. As I mentioned, I manage the short-range transportation planning process at the TPO, so the funding decisions and the tip side of it. So I'm filling in for Chet today. Unfortunately, I had something come up. So there's two updates. There's a CVTA update and the TPO update on the agenda. For the CVTA, just wanted to run quickly through the items that the various committees heard. The first thing was an update on Smart Scale. So the CVTA had over $250 million leveraged on 16 different Smart Scale applications that went through the process this round, round 5. Out of those, there were about $127 million that were successful in the staff recommended scenario. So about half of the funding went towards successful applications. And that is over $6 in return on that leverage investment. So for every dollar the CVTA put in, the expectation based on that staff scenario is that an additional $6 will come back for the projects. So it was a pretty successful round. It was good for the region as a whole. We performed well relative to the other districts across the state. So that's a bit of a change from previous rounds of Smart Scale. The CVTA board and committees are reviewing leveraging so that we can continue to maximize that moving forward. The other big things that were considered this past month, the CTAC is looking into the framework document for selecting projects and how projects are eligible and how they're awarded funds. So that's an ongoing process that will be continuing, and they're looking to try and wrap that up. I believe next month is the schedule for that. The CVTA is working on a standard project agreement with the localities so that we can actually start moving some of these projects forward. So anything that would be administered by the county or city can actually get started and start spending those dollars rather than just having them sitting there. And the last piece is the Fall Line Working Group has continued its work. So they actually heard a presentation about options for finding full funding, essentially. So grant opportunities, different programs, and how to apply for additional funds to continue filling that gap that's remains the deficit on the Fall Line Trail. For the TPO, the only big update is the next meeting will be on April 6th. And the agenda will be posted ahead of time, about a week ahead of time. So that's all. Happy to answer any questions.
John?
Yeah, I must not be understanding this right. You mentioned the figures, the amount that was leveraged and the amount was successful. And when I hear the amount that's leveraged, it's not clear to me whether we're saying the amount we were applying for and then the amount successful is what we got. Is that the amount that we're putting up? Can you explain that a little more detail?
Sure. So the CVTA had $253 million on different projects that were only partially funded via the CVTA. And so all of those went into the application process. Half of those dollars were successful. So out of the 16 projects that were submitted, I forget the exact number, it was like 6 maybe that were successful, but they were half of the funding. So $127 million from that pot of 250 was successful in getting the rest of the funding that it needed for the project. So an example of that, I think the biggest one is the I-64 gap. So the CVTA had $100 million on that project. The total project is $750 million. So there was, that leverage was applied and successful to attract additional dollars. So then across all of those projects, you know, the $750 million project, all the other projects that were awarded in the staff scenario, and obviously that's not finalized yet, but in that staff scenario, it was 6 additional dollars went to those projects for every dollar that the CVTA put in. So in essence, we're getting almost, I think it was $800 million of projects for $127 million of leverage. So that's kind of the success story from the CVTA leverage this round.
I have a question about the 64 funding. So you had CVTA money for 64 widening. You had now smart scale money that's been promised. What about the general fund money from the from last year's General Assembly and potentially this year's General Assembly? Will that be in addition to those other pots of
Correct.
money?
So there was the $100 million from the CVTA, there was the money from the General Assembly last year and this year, and then there was an additional $25 million in a federal discretionary grant. So there was still a gap of $160 million or so, and that's what the Smart Scale Award would be for. So that would fill the full project cost for the $750 million.
But if the budget passes, you know, for this year, because the General Assembly didn't really pass a budget. So there's money in there if it ends up in the final budget. So whatever comes of that, that will be even on top of all that you've referenced. Is that correct?
My understanding was that funding was kind of committed last time, and so it's just programming it, and it was sort of assuming there was surplus in the budget that could still fund it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Has Hampton Roads put up any money towards that project, do you know?
Not toward this portion of it.
Yeah,
Obviously, they've
right.
been working on all the other
Down there,
sections of
that's
getting
right.
up there.
Billions, but yeah, right.
Okay, all right, thank you, Miles. Before we go into the new business here, we have a General Assembly update and a number of presenters on that. But Brantley has just informed me that he needs to leave at 1 o'clock and he's got 2 items on the agenda. So just bear with us that we're not gonna have the whole overview that John's gonna provide yet. We're gonna take them out of order and let Brantley talk about the bike ped bills, and then Brantley, you'll talk about what we had under other business for safety metrics.
I appreciate it. I'm Brantley Tyndall, Director of Bike Walk RVA and President of Virginia Bicycling Federation. Certainly preceded by Champ and long service there. This year, as anticipated, didn't have a lot of fireworks at the General Assembly. Not a lot changed. There were 3 primary bills. Dick Sasslaw carried a bill that clarified and kind of emboldened our stop for pedestrian law. So it's no longer stop as yield, but just stop for pedestrians. Didn't change anything else about it. It's essentially an effort to get new signage that to clarify that yield for pedestrian signs would no longer be applicable, and that passed. Jeff Bourne carried a bill that would extend the distance for school zones from 600 feet to 750 feet. Otherwise, a very minor change to the law. And then Delegate Adams carried a bill that this is a little on the periphery, but it allows for localities to provide incentives for greenway development, as well as other things related to like heat island effect and environmental concerns, but greenways were added to that. So there were a lot of ambitious bills for biking and walking, and they will try again next year.
Was that Idaho stop thing?
The safety stop
Okay.
got it farther than it ever has.
Okay.
And we had a House bill and a Senate bill. They were very different models. The Senate bill was carried by Senator Deeds, which we were very pleased to see, because he was the lead negotiator in 2021 that pulled that out of the Bicyclist Safety Act, because it was the sort of the contentious issue that allowed the other two elements to pass. So he then brought it back in like a very, I thought a show of goodwill that I thought was very effective. He did a good job carrying the bill, but wasn't the year for it. The House version carried by Delegate Carr was a compromise bill that we helped draft based on the study that was a part of that negotiation for 2021. Virginia State Police put together a stakeholder group, and the study that they presented to the General Assembly was largely favorable to a modified version. So we prepared a modified version. Regardless, neither of them passed, so we'll see what next year looks like.
Any questions of Brantley? Any of you also involved in any of the bike ped legislation? All right, Brantley, why don't you go ahead with your other agenda item?
Certainly. Is there
So you have his presentation?
Thank you very much. This is my first time coming to this committee, so thanks for letting me present today. I saw that this is sort of one of your unscheduled items on the end of your agenda, so I'm happy to kind of provide some of this. I don't represent the DMV, but I use a lot of their data here. I will say that they will always tell you that it's preliminary, but when you look at it from year to year, it doesn't change that much as it gets processed. So I just want to kind of give you that stipulation. And a little quick clarification, I work for the Sports Backers. We're a Richmond regional nonprofit organization, and I direct their Bike Walk RVA program. It's about safe biking and walking, largely through infrastructure and advocacy. And we have an effort that's our regional effort of a national, or component of a national effort called Families for Safe Streets. That's about elevating the stories of people who've been killed in traffic and sort of humanizing them and recognizing this is a change that we need to make. The next slide is just sort of a visual of that. Next slide. This is a little bit about Bike Walk RVA. We primarily focus on infrastructure. We think that's the biggest change that we can make to highway safety, especially for vulnerable road users. Next slide. Oh, you probably have to click this a couple of times. And our greater organization, Sports Backers, is largely known for our active living events. Monument Avenue 10K is coming up on April 22nd, if you'd like to register. A quick reminder that everybody is a pedestrian at some point, especially people who are trying to get to the bus, or people who have to get out of their car to go somewhere. Everyone has to walk or roll in our pedestrian infrastructure in some way or another. And now I'm going to present a lot of statistics. I'm trying to kind of simplify it as much as possible, but there are some alarming takeaways that I hope that we can land on, and I'm happy to answer questions if you would like. This data is directly from the DMV. I tried to kind of streamline it a little bit so you can see it clearly, but I want to show that from last year, from the last complete year, 2021, or the last complete year of data is 2022. So I'm comparing it largely to the year 2021 before that, but I provided some data from the previous years so we can see some trends, and we can stop along the way if you have any questions. But I'm going to compare some Virginia statistics to regional statistics so that we have a better understanding about what's going on here. And the first two slides will look at the metropolitan statistical area, so it will include some localities that are not a part of the planning district. But later on, I'll show the planning district numbers. So the takeaway from this one is from last year, or 2021 to 2022, statewide, there was a over 4% increase in overall traffic fatalities. So the first time getting over 1,000 in over 15 years. So I think that's an alarming statistic, and that trend has been increasing for a number of years. So generally speaking, Virginia is not doing great recently. Next slide. Virginia crashes that were pedestrian only, that number has also been going up. We've seen a 36% increase in pedestrian fatalities in Virginia from 2021 to 2022. That number also has been increasing. Next slide. Bicyclists, we actually had a pretty big decrease. Now, we were really getting into the law of small numbers here, so the trend analysis is a little trickier. But so we saw a 100% increase from 2020 to 2021, but then a slight decrease from 2021 to 2022. And I think it's worth noting, though I would certainly want to describe this as being entirely causal, but the change lanes to pass law that took effect mid 2021 could potentially impact some of those numbers. Next slide. So here I'm going to the Plan RVA, or the Richmond Regional Plan District Commission, as opposed to the MSA. All crashes from 2021 to 2022, or that were fatal, increased 22%. Pretty intense. Over 110 people were killed. And I want to stipulate that for the next several slides, I think all the next slides, I took out interstate numbers, so just local highways. Next slide. Did we switch it? Yeah, we did. Sorry, it's a little hard to see some of these. In the planning district, pedestrian only non-interstate increased 31.5%. I will say that we saw a little bit of a dip in 2021. So if you look from 2020 to 2022, it changed from 28 to 25. So you could call that a subtle decrease even, but the trend has been mid 20s. So we're kind of tracking the same, but we did see a big increase from 2021 to 2022. Next slide. Now, here's where you might see some surprising numbers. I served sort of as a citizen on the DMV Pedestrian Task Force for a number of years, and they have, over the past several years, have highlighted that people over 50 are more susceptible to being killed in traffic. So I've got a couple of slides about that. This is not pedestrian only, this is for all crashes. In Virginia, we see a 21% increase of people over 50 being killed in traffic from 2021 to 2022, up to 400 people. And then in RVA, all crashes, not just pedestrians, an 82% increase of people over 50 killed in traffic. Pretty big change, and I think certainly something that should raise some flags. Next slide. This is the same analysis, but for pedestrians only. So in Virginia, we saw a 42% increase, people over 50 killed in traffic, 2021 and 2022. And in the Plan RVA district, 110% increase. Or 111%, sorry. We're, again, getting into small numbers, so swings can happen a little more intensely there, but whenever you see 110%, 11% increase in something, I think we should draw some attention to it. And the way that I think is really important to think about this isn't their first time around the block. Like, what's changed? They haven't changed. Something else is changing. What's causing this increase in pedestrian fatalities? I'm not an expert. I think this is a long time, multifaceted thing to talk about. Trucks are getting bigger, speeds are up. One could draw some conclusions about enforcement. I certainly, in my personal observation, have seen reckless driving and all kinds of facets increase, just from my observation, but I think many of us might share that opinion. Yes. What the heck can we do
on the interstate as well as in town? Yeah, I mean, just the speed and recklessness, you can witness it almost any day you're on the road. People that pull up right behind you on your bumper and quickly zigzag lanes,
The other day, I got this dreamy moment of someone passed me 25 miles an hour faster than me on the interstate, and we locked eyes as they were going by me, and then I happened to see them get pulled over about a quarter of a mile up the road, which is like, you never see that, but like, got one. But that's certainly not that's the exception that proves the rule,
Also phones and distractions.
Yeah.
I think that people they're not paying attention.
I agree. I think that might be the end of, one more slide, that might be the end of my statistics about what's happening in the region and around the state. I'm happy to entertain questions if there's anything. I do this as an advocate, so there are many questions I can't answer.
So what's the takeaway for us as CTAC? So we just.
I probably have a few slides for that, but I think the big takeaway is, like, if you're gonna talk to people on the TPO and beyond, is that there is a huge problem to solve here, and there is no quick thing. There certainly is not. And I represent the active transportation side of things, and we all walk at some point, so everyone gets affected by if you cross the street or not. And it's interesting, like even Kirk Cox, when he was a delegate, I don't think he was speaker at the time, was hit on Broad and 9th Street, like walking in a crosswalk. So even people who, you think would, could be, because of their own attention, invulnerable to this sort of situation, we're not. It can happen to anybody. So I do have a couple of slides that I think from a biking and walking standpoint. Speed, the reduction in speed increases crash survivability, super important. The Smart Growth America publishes every year Dangerous by Design. One of the big takeaways about that is that people of color and people of low income are higher susceptibility to being killed in traffic, especially while biking and walking, sometimes 2 to 4 times, depending on your race category. Something to keep in mind. National research shows that over half of all trips are less than 3 miles. Those are trips that can be done biking and walking or with transit. And if we can think about replacing those trips with car trips, then we are decreasing people's exposure to being hit by a car. Next slide. Most people are really interested in biking, but the built environment does not allow them to do so. That you ask anyone on the street, say, is it safe to bike? Would you bike to wherever you're trying to go? Most people would say no, but maybe if there were some safer way to do it, they would be interested in doing it. This is national research that's been done a number of times. We have also done a similar study at VCU about 10 years ago that showed the same thing, and localities around the country have done the similar research, and it always comes out to roughly this ratio. Next slide. Protected bike infrastructure works. Wherever it's been built in an effective network, you see a reduction in traffic fatalities. And actually a great example, this is little apples and oranges, but the Pulse corridor has seen significant reductions in fatalities overall. And while you might see coverage about a pedestrian being killed, all those KAs are reducing because that street has been redesigned with people in mind, even for people who bike. You might think that, wow, crossing Broad Street here is complicated, but it's actually safer. So we can solve the problem if we build it correctly.
Has the red paint helped?
I haven't gotten an update since the red paint's gone in, but definitely there were a lot of questions about median running buses and whether or not the pedestrians would be in danger. And while yes, there have been fatalities in that corridor in that time, the rates have dropped significantly. I think we're getting close to the end. In the interest of time, I won't share too many pictures here. I used to live in this neighborhood, and what's the thing that jumps out about this picture? There actually is a sidewalk, but it's so poorly maintained that this person in a power wheelchair has it right on the road. Next slide. This is on Brook Road. An advocate for the Brook Road bike lane had a car or truck land in their front yard. Reductions of speed can prevent things like this. Next slide. People want to bike. Kids, parents, and if you build it, they will ride. Next slide, please. We have people who really want to advocate for it. Next slide. And back to the Families for Safe Streets, sort of the traffic safety side of this. People, we need to think about the cohort of people who are killed. We all share this built environment. It's a common space. It is the commons. And as these numbers are going the wrong direction, we should be changing the way that we build our roads. I think we can go through a couple of these slides pretty quickly. Next slide. And that's it. I appreciate your time. Yeah, thanks for. I hope that I recognize this is a community board. There's not a huge, and even the discussion previously, not a lot of decision-making power here. But I certainly think that we can get some of this is kind of a big deal. These are big numbers, and it's just the most recent trend of all these numbers going up over several years.
Well, please help us in terms of getting feedback from the bike walk community about things that we'd like their input on as we look at these plans going forward.
Well, so I'll say from a national standpoint, what all of our national organizations stress is lower speed, and we can do that through the built environment. Speed is the number one predictor about whether a crash will be fatal. Vision zero, which is the national concept of the only acceptable number of traffic fatalities is 0, and all of our transportation work should be getting towards that number. This doesn't say that there should be 0 crashes. It should be that those crashes are survivable and they won't maim you or permanently change your life. So well, how do we do that? We dedicate space for people biking and walking, we give them alternatives. Would most people say that they have options, or would most people say that they have to drive to get to where they want to go? So options, I think, are key, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Brantley, you brought up Brook Road with that red truck. I travel Brook Road heading south off the interstate fairly frequently. And as a driver, it's not obvious how those lanes are marked along Brook Road there to Azalea Mall and heading on down to Bellevue. Very confusing marking. It goes into one lane abruptly without, I didn't see any marking particularly obvious that takes it back to one lane. Then you've got some designated parking, then you've got the bike lanes. I also noticed here, well, where are we? There in downtown, that around Museum District, et cetera, there are designated biking lanes and parking lanes, which are very confusing. I don't know whether that's an education issue, whether it's a marking issue, whether it's just getting used to what the reality of today is in regards to the differences. I don't know that there's any consistency necessarily in the marking of where is parking, where is the bike lane, and where are you as a driver supposed to be driving? I don't know if you have any input in regards or observation to that.
Well, the first thing I'll say is that confusion can actually be a really helpful traffic calming measure, that people slow down when they don't know what they're doing, and that's.
Yeah, and you get tail end.
Well, and the data
that doesn't
from,
bother a
the data
biker.
from Brook Road has shown significant reduction in car travel speed, which is exceptional. Before that bike lane was put in, they saw instances in the speed studies that they did of people driving 90 miles an hour down it. When there were 2 lanes and there was an empty parking lane, people feel like they can drive as fast as they want. That's been reduced significantly. The other is, as an advocate, I don't build bike lanes, I don't design them. I do my best to advocate for them to be high quality. And so certainly we share those kinds of concerns about, we do actually want people to know where they can park and where they can't drive and that sort of thing. So we weigh in when the consultants have public engagement. We actually facilitate 30,000 people in the Richmond region weighing into the surveys that they do or the public hearings. And so we do our best, we certainly do. And everything is a compromise. But all the data suggests that on Brook Road, the numbers are going in the right direction instead of the other.
One of the problems is when you want to take a right onto Bellevue or Westwood or something, how do you, because you've got to go across the bike lane. And how do you do that safely for both yourself and the biker? And I don't know, confused about that.
You look for them and don't hit them.
Okay. Easier said than done sometimes.
Okay, thank you, Brandon.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, well, the second part of our program today is under new business is General Assembly update. And the newsletter I put out to our members was General Assembly wraps up mostly. So, as I mentioned earlier, we don't really have a budget. We just have the skinny budget, they call it. So anyway, I'm gonna ask John he focuses on legislation, to give us an overview. And then I will talk about some transit bills, and Victoria will talk about some clean car bills, just to bring you all up to date with some things that actually were successful in the General Assembly. And Victoria?
I spoke to you earlier, I just wanna warn you, I gotta head out around like 1:20.
Okay.
Do you wanna let her go first?
Okay, why don't you go first? Okay.
I didn't realize how many folks would be in this room, so I didn't print out enough copies, but maybe I'll have, you guys can just pass this around as you see fit. I'm gonna talk about 2 bills that have to do with electric vehicles. My organization, my organization advocates for climate solutions, and so a big piece of that, since transportation is our biggest emitter in the state, is advocating both for electrification of vehicles and also for public transit, increasing dollars for public transit. So I'm gonna talk about 2 things for EVs. One is there was a big effort this year to repeal clean car standards. I don't know how familiar, I assume probably pretty familiar this body is with what those are, but basically Virginia has two options for tailpipe emission standards. They can follow the federal guidelines or they can follow the more stringent California guidelines. We can't set our own guidelines. And so in 2021, Virginia adopted the more stringent California standards, which were updated this past year to accelerate a transition to electric vehicles. So getting to 100% of new vehicle sales being zero emission by 2035. And there's 20% flexibility there for plug-in hybrids that still have gasoline. And again, that's just new vehicle sales. So perhaps sadly for climate advocates, even with that number, only about 20% of vehicles on the road in 2035 will be zero emission because so many vehicle sales are used, et cetera. With the updated standards, there was just a lot of political momentum for repealing our involvement. There were 7 bills filed, and the long story short is that they all failed for this year. I will say there are a lot of sort of complementary policies that need to be implemented in order to make our adoption of clean car standards successful. So I'm talking about bringing down the price tag for EVs in general. They're still a little bit more expensive than traditional ICE vehicles, though with the new federal incentives, they're much closer to price parity and will be in just like 2 or 3 years, pretty equal. But we have an EV rebate that hasn't been funded at the state level. And then the other thing is really investing in EV charging infrastructure. So that's one of the other bills that I'll talk about. I don't have my own copy. The other bill was a bill that would have created funding for implementing electric vehicle charging stations in quote unquote distressed localities. So that means low population density, high poverty rates and high unemployment rates. And the impetus there is that the private market as well as federal dollars are gonna mostly take care of major highway corridors. It's gonna take some time, but those are gonna start popping up and eventually we'll get where we need to be there. But without intentional investment in rural and low income areas, there isn't gonna be sufficient charging infrastructure. Also, some of these are beautiful scenic areas where people from cities, from more densely populated places want to travel. And as people are moving into EVs, they're not going to be able to visit our beautiful scenic rural areas if there isn't charging infrastructure available to them there. Unfortunately, it hit a roadblock, which you'll see here in the Appropriations Committee. Just anything with the word EV gets a little partisan. We'll see what happens with the huge shift in the General Assembly next year. But all that's to say is that we're hoping our General Assembly will not only, at least I am as an advocate, hoping our General Assembly will stand by the standards, but also implement complementary policies to make sure that they're successful.
Well, I sent this morning, I got notification from an organization that Virginia Transit Association is a member of called Center for Transportation in the Environment. They do a lot of assistance for transit agencies and communities applying for grants, and one was about charging infrastructure. So there's some other federal opportunities out there in the meanwhile, as we wait for the General Assembly to finish shuffling and see what's possible in the upcoming session.
Yeah, let me ask a question. Having taken a road trip with in a friend's Tesla up to DC a couple months back, well, it really was an eye-opener, it was great. But one thing, and I haven't heard anybody really address this, is grid stress. I mean, we're having brownouts now with just regular usage, and if we suddenly add 200 million cars to our electric grid, what's being talked about in terms of supporting that? Is there going to be almost like a rural electrification act? What's Dominion saying about this? Can we support it? I mean, it's a great idea and it works, but if everybody switches over, how do we keep everything charged up?
Yeah, so there has been a fair amount of analysis about this, and EVs don't actually add too much stress to the grid throughout the course of this policy. So again, by 2035, only 20% of vehicles on the road are gonna be zero emission. There's a lot of advancements in technology where EVs can actually be sources of power. It's called vehicle to grid, et cetera. Y'all are pretty familiar. But the data just generally shows it's just not as big of a deal as it is made out to be. We definitely need to do transmission upgrades. Dominion's building a lot of power right now, as I'm sure y'all are aware. So there isn't a huge concern with EVs. I will say the bigger stressor on the grid is actually data centers. They're 20% of Dominion's load right now. So I think there's a little bit more concern, I think, than there is a need to be, at least in the short term.
New technology that's not on the market yet, storage, energy storage from batteries, and like a freight shipping container is, there's your storage. There's things that Tesla's doing and other technology giants are working on to get away from the rare minerals, getting away toward, instead of just plugging in, finding other sources of electricity. So we don't even know what they all are yet. But as we gradually come on board more and more, then some of these will be ramping up, so.
Champ,
Go ahead.
one other thing there is, I have an EV, and so for example, I get a $7 rebate from a house I have up in Rappahannock Electric every month on my bill, because what I do is I program it to recharge between 9 p.m. and 6 in the morning. And so there are ways to incentivize it, because providing power is so much about peak demand. And so trying to incentivize people to charge it, and if you're charging at your home, it's so easy to charge it overnight. It makes perfect sense. So that helps with the problem. It doesn't take care of it, but it helps.
In fact, my friend, he's got an upscale place down on the Outer Banks, and a couple of times when he does level 2 charging, he's knocked out the whole cul-de-sac by the draw. I mean, when you're talking about literally hundreds of millions of cars, that's a lot of juice, no matter how much you spread it out. And again, you look at California with the brownouts and what's going on, at some point, somebody's got to address that issue. And I'm just curious to know, what that long-term plan is to make it all work. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like it, I'm all for it, but it's a big, big task.
A friend of mine tells me that he is in the process of purchasing one of the newer Teslas that actually has a solar skin. And so just out parked, it is absorbing current from the skin that it's got and recharging its batteries. That would be the future of the technology, that you don't have to tap in as just being in the presence of sunlight. You're charging your batteries. Of course, that happens to us too, doesn't it?
Well, thank you, and thank you, Victoria. Appreciate the update. I'm going to turn to John now, and we'll roll back and offer an overview of the GA session and then some other transportation updates.
Yeah, I think we have some slides you're gonna pull up, and I can start without them because it's not that critical. Obviously, with divided government, with the Senate controlled by the Democrats and the House controlled by the Republicans, and with an election coming up this coming November, that really impacted what was gonna get done at the General Assembly this year. What a lot of people don't realize is, more than half of the bills that got submitted actually passed, both houses. But they tend to be on non-controversial issues where, you have one vote against it and out of 100 in the House, or 4 votes against it or something. So, there's substantial consensus on the overwhelming majority. But on the other bills, and you can go ahead to the next slide. On the other bills, with Republicans controlling one house and Democrats controlling the other, it tended to cancel out a lot of what was done. So for example, if you look at the vote counts on the 2 bills that Victoria emphasized, they're almost totally partisan breakdowns. There's only one Democrat voting for one of the bill against his party. And on the other bill, it's all Republicans one way and Democrats the other. So when you get to those issues, the Senate tended to get rid of the Republicans' bills out of the House and vice versa for the Democratic bills out of the Senate. A couple bills that I think were interesting that did come out. First of all, you saw at the very end of the session, the agreement to resolve what to do about utility bills. I mean, they did come together on that. Whether it's the right answer, I have no idea. But it was good to see them come together. And another bill, which the chamber was very involved with was the realignment of the state's workforce efforts. And the administration did an amazing job. The Secretary of Labor, Brian Slater, started out with a substantially partisan debate, which with the opponents opposing it and with the Democrats opposing it and the Republicans supporting the bill because it was the governor's bill. That's not the only reason, but that was one of the reasons. So, but he worked and worked and worked. He was able to get labor, which had some objections to it, to come on board. And in the end, the bill went through almost unanimously in both houses. That's really pretty neat to see, and it's pretty rare, frankly. You know, that something starts out partisan. You know, originally, the thing passed the Senate, I think it was 39-0, and the vote in the House was close to 52-48, which is the breakdown of the parties. And then the administration kept working it, and eventually labor supported all the changes. And, you know, it's rare, but it was really nice to see. So I just cited that. Once in a while, things really work out the way they should. Obviously, as Lisa said, we didn't get an agreement on the main parts of the budget. Yes, we did get the so-called skinny budget, which did, you know, some ministerial stuff, basically money they'd already said in the budget from last year, assuming they met certain financial targets, that they would go ahead and have to put into certain funds. So they went ahead and actually approved those. And then they also covered the $200 and some million mistake that the State Department of Education had made in terms of estimating for local school districts how much money they were going to do. So that's all they did in their so-called skinny budget. I mean, there were a few other things, but that was pretty much it. So we're still sitting here without a budget. We're going to have a special session for it if we have it. And it'd be interesting to see. You've probably seen articles in the paper in the last day or two about whether they're meeting and, you know, whether the chairs of the House and Senate committees are meeting to try and resolve this. Before I turn to transportation specifically, I just want to comment on the fact that, you know, looking forward, we're going to have a very, very different General Assembly next year. You know, so much of the senior leadership is retiring, especially on the Senate side. They tend to be people who for many years, despite their philosophical differences on issues, in the end have figured out how to compromise and come together and get us a budget and do issues like that. So many of those people are retiring. We just got an announcement yesterday that Steve Newman, yet another senior person, is going to retire. And Steve is a very conservative Republican, but he got along well with people on both sides. He used to chair the Senate when the Republicans were in control, chaired the Senate Education and Health Committee, always a gentleman to everybody. And he could find ways to talk to each other. You know, yet another person on top of losing, you know, Tommy Norman and Dick Zasla as the majority and minority leaders. So we're going to have a big issue. In addition to the people who've actually announced they're retiring, we have a whole slew more who, because of redistricting, some of them are going to disappear because the redistricting group, the plan that was approved, in the end, it totally ignored incumbency. It was not a factor they considered. And so we have so many legislators where two incumbent Republicans are now in the same district, or two incumbent Democrats are in the same district, and you're going to lose one of them. So we are going to lose a lot. You know, some estimates are between 25 and 40% of the legislators in each chamber will probably not be there next year. So, I mean, that's going to be significant. One other thing, because we've still got to resolve the budget, hasn't gotten much attention till I finally saw an article about it yesterday, but I've been concerned about this for a few months. And that is for legislators whose districts are changing and who don't live in a district where, you know, they live both in their old district and their new district. The fact that the registration deadline to sign up as a candidate comes up on April 6th. To become a candidate, you're supposed to certify, I live in this new district, I'm a resident of this new district. To continue to represent your old district, you have to live in the old district. And if the two don't happen to overlap, or if you can't find an apartment that happens temporarily to go move into, to be in both, you're gonna have to decide, am I gonna declare to be a candidate for election this November? Or am I gonna continue to represent and be around for the special session on the budget or the veto session?
And you have to resign, I think, to make that change though, don't you?
Pardon me?
You have to resign your current seat.
I-
If you do that for the registration, I heard.
I mean,
It could be
yeah,
challenged.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, whether or not you do, I don't know, but in
Yeah.
fact, you have to certify one way or another, and you're supposed to lose your seat if you don't live in the district anymore. So how they're gonna deal with that, I don't know. But, you know, when you have a House that's divided 52-48 and a Senate that's divided 22-18, you know, just a few of those, one way or another, could make a big difference on who's voting on the budget in the end. So we actually have an interesting, complicated situation coming up. We'll have to watch. Okay, so transportation. All in all, I would say there was really relatively little focus on transportation this year. You know, we've heard about some specific bills, and there are some, but not a lot, and much less focus than there had been in previous years. I did want to talk about one particular issue, and that is this thing called the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund. That is a fund that already exists and has been established, and as it says in that top bullet, was a fund to cover the transportation aspects of economic development projects. It's funded essentially by money that was appropriated by the General Assembly every budget. The bills, and this was a governor's bill that was put in, carried on the Senate and House side by a couple people, changed that slightly. And it will now allow the money to be used to enhance economic development opportunities of transportation projects. All it's done is switch some words around, but it's really important if you think about it. Because one is saying, you've got an economic development project, this is transportation money, and it can cover the transportation aspects. This other one is saying, if you've got already Virginia transportation funding of some kind, this money, this fund can now be used to fund purely the economic development aspects related to that. So it's a subtle difference, but if chosen to do, it could essentially take this fund that has been for transportation and say it's really gonna be for economic development. There still has to be a nexus to both, but you know, transportation's everywhere. So if you wanna stretch that, you can say, okay, so we're gonna, you know, do some economic development project that's near some highway that's being funded, okay? And then the $50 million goes there instead of to transportation. So this potentially has significant impact on this particular fund. Next slide, please. So as it was originally proposed, those two bills, in addition to making that change, would have required the governor to allocate $100 million every year to this fund that now could be used for economic development purposes. The concern was, okay, that money, if you take it where it comes from, would otherwise be part of the transportation funds for the state. So would have been losing $100 million that now goes to transportation for it to go for this particular purpose. Well, fortunately, that got taken out of the bill, and so there no longer is that requirement. Instead, what there is it'll just be money that comes out of the general funds. And so whatever the General Assembly allocates will be available to be used, you know, for this fund. But it no longer automatically drains $100 million out of transportation and puts it into this fund that could be used for economic development. The other big dispute was originally proposed. This bill would have essentially left it totally under the control of the governor. And a lot of people, especially the opponents, referred to it as the governor's slush fund. Okay, I don't think that's really fair, but it's, you know, it at least gives you the sense of what it was. Well, the General Assembly said, no, we're not having any of that. What we're gonna do is we're gonna put some guardrails on that. And they particularly said, if you're gonna have a larger thing, a project more than $35 million, then before it can be allocated from this fund, has to be approved by the MEI Commission, which is a General Assembly, House and Senate members sit on that and approve economic development projects ahead of time. So I think in the end, this came out okay. It still could have some implications, but at least the General Assembly as a whole, as opposed to the governor, is helping to control this. And we have to be, just watch and see what's happening in terms of any impact that it's going to have on transportation funding. But at least it doesn't have the $100 million automatically. So
And we won't know what's in this budget until they have a budget.
approve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So we have no idea what that's going to be at this point. So that's the one bill I thought was big enough and large enough to talk to you about, that makes sense to talk about a little bit, so.
It was rumored that this was for the purpose of the new FBI headquarters.
Makes sense.
And I mean, the chamber obviously supports economic development projects, that and transportation are two really important things to, but I mean, frankly, as it originally proposed, we didn't take a position on the bill because of the concern that we've talked about, that this might be really hurting transportation at the expense of economic development. So, frankly, from the chamber's standpoint, we're a lot more comfortable where it ended up in the end. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about transportation funding to give you a framework about why the bills that we worked on this session were important related to public transit. So I know this is hard to read, but hopefully you'll be able to, that's flowing, okay. So one of the concerns that Virginia Transit Association had about this TPOF bill is that we were concerned about removal of transportation funding. The whole transportation funding scenario changed in 2020 with the omnibus bill. So before that, you had these revenue sources went to transit, these went to roads. We called it the spaghetti strand model, and that was not workable. So in 2020, it was amazing legislation, and I'm glad it happened when it did. So instead, can you do the previous slide here? I don't know why it's only, just leave it there for a second. So anyway, the gas tax is one of the sources. You have sales tax, you have some regional taxes. There's a lot of sources of transportation revenue, but we wanted to just show how gas tax flows to GRTC. That was the model we were using on this. So if you can see that, that the transportation funding, what's available to you at the top and how it splits, first of all, into two different funds. You have highway maintenance, that's 51% carved off the top. Then we have what was previously known as the trust fund, now they call it the Commonwealth Transportation Fund. That gets divvied up by percentages according to all the various modes. If you look over to the right, you can see mass transit fund, rail fund, port fund, aviation fund, etc. So from the mass transit fund, which is 23% of the total of the trust fund pot, you have from that, if you follow the arrow, then you go over here back to the left and it shows non-WMATA, because that's Metro gets its own pot of money. The non-WMATA, you have a certain amount of money there, and then from that you can see where that's what GRTC ends up with. So that's just kind of a flow chart of how the money starts and how you end up with what's for transit. If any of the sources of revenue are removed or reduced, obviously those figures are going to be reduced, and each mode is going to get less. So let's go to the next slide, please. So currently, under the Mass Transit Fund, you can see how it's divvied out. And you have Transit Ridership Incentive Program at 6% of the total funding pie. So, and in the past, Virginia Railway Express got its funding from the operations and capital, just like all the other transit systems did. But that changed this year with this legislation, VRE, because they have suffered with a decrease in ridership significantly because of the lack of federal workforce going into the office and commuting, people are still working at home, their ridership has been down significantly. Unlike GRTC, whose ridership has actually increased since COVID. So with that, they're going to get their own percentage, their own performance metrics and whatnot. So, but I wanted to show you this this transit ridership incentive program, so you can see that that's how it gets its funding. And you've heard presentations before, but the Transit Ridership Incentive Program is a statewide grant program dedicated to providing regional connectivity in urban areas with a population in excess of 100,000 and reducing barriers to transit use by supporting low-income and zero-fare programming. GRTC has been getting that since this went into effect, and their grant is getting ready to phase out because they've utilized the full 3 years of it. So what has not been utilized is this regional connectivity component. Because people were not going to work, this legislation in 2020 was pre-pandemic. So we envisioned that there would be a lot of cross-jurisdictional commuting ridership, for instance, from Prince William into the district, or from Alexandria to Loudoun, or, you know, in Hampton Roads from Virginia Beach to Norfolk and whatnot, in these regional routes. Well, that came screeching to a halt with the pandemic. So, and has not really been utilized fully. And so there's dollars that are left in this fund that we want to protect. We don't want those dollars siphoned off to be used for some other arbitrary purpose. So we wanted to expand the utilization of the TRIP funds. And so we asked Jennifer McClellan in the Senate and Dolores McQuinn in the House to carry a bill that would allow the CTB to allocate up to 30% of the TRIP funds to go toward bus infrastructure to address, you will recall, you've had presentations on this too, that DRPT has done a presentation on their study on equity and mobility over the past 2 years. That study was completed last summer, and they have recommendations from that. And so one of the recommendations is people can't take transit if they can't get to the bus. So if they get there and they're standing in a flooded ditch because there's no infrastructure, there's no shelter, there's no bench, there's no lighting, there's no ADA accessibility, they're not gonna take transit. They're gonna try everything they can to keep from having to subject themselves to those conditions. And so there needs to be some funding to assist localities and local transit agencies with providing these measures. Some of it is a right-of-way issue with VDOT and whatnot. We're working on that separately. But we needed additional funding for what we're calling bus infrastructure. And also, we need some funding to help transit agencies transition to zero-emission buses. Not to buy the rolling stock, primarily that comes from federal grants and their operating grants from DRPT, but especially the smaller agencies do not have the staff or the funding to hire the consultants to do the strategic planning, the transitional planning that's required to even apply for the FTA grants. So there's a lot of money that they have to invest to even get on the path to transitioning, to even think about applying for a grant. They have workforce issues of bus operators and bus mechanics that working on a EV is a whole lot different than working on a gasoline or diesel bus. So anyway, those are some things that we recognized a need for. And fortunately, the legislation did pass. So that will be going into effect, hopefully, and well, we'll see what the governor does with the bill. But it's our hope that that will go into effect and really make that TRIP program even more robust. And so with that, we really, I think we covered everything else. Just one thing of interest here is bus operator assault and battery. There was GRTC put in a bill that would make it have a mandatory minimum for somebody to go to jail at least for 2 days for assaulting a bus operator, bus driver. And there was a lot of pushback on mandatory minimums. And so it was amended to remove that, but it also makes assault and battery on a transit operator a Class 1 misdemeanor. And such convicted person shall be prohibited from entering or riding the bus for no less than 6 months. So that did pass. So that's pretty much, the nutshell of the transportation legislation. So for those of you who did not have the pleasure of making it down there in person. So, any questions or any comments about anything related to the General Assembly, or any observations you wanted to share?
I think one of the challenges, of course, that you were talking about is the transition and the retirement of some of our senior folks. You are typically replaced by younger people who have no experience, and they're going to be thrown into budget talks and some very complicated bills and the budget with absolutely no experience at all. And with that might come some lengthy discussions and some mistakes that are made and decisions that are made inappropriately. So that's a danger.
Well, and the budget is a vehicle for a lot of policy making that's not related to budgetary matters. And so learning that as well.
Also, Upton, I think, there's clearly been a trend for newer people to be more partisan than the people who've been around for a long time. And, that doesn't serve us well in terms of trying to get things done. But, there's tendency more and more every year. Virginia becomes more like the federal government in terms of being more and more partisan. And, so I think the chances are it's going to be more partisan next year than it is this year.
Yeah. All right, well, moving ahead, and thank you, John, and Brantley and Victoria, who had to leave. Looking at future meeting topics on page 7, you'll note that at our May meeting, our next meeting is a presentation on Henrico's Green City. Anxious to hear about that and hear about, how transportation planning goes into that major project. So are those people good for?
I have not contacted them, but
Okay,
I will be starting on that
Okay.
very soon.
All right, and you can see that there's others that are suggested. We may need to modify this if we have other things we need to talk about with projects and maybe some civic engagement, community engagement projects. And now we are at CTAC member comments. Anybody else have announcements or anything else they wish to bring up? Any other additions for the good of the order? If not, we'll be ready to entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved. Seconded. All those in favor of adjournment? Say aye.
I
Aye.
have a question. Would any of these
Yes.
presentations be beneficial if it's on website next to our meeting materials or to access if you guys wanted to see this or?
Not really. Yeah. I don't know about John's. He may want to put his up, but mine was not intended to be put on the website.
Hey, Ken?
I don't
Yes.
mind,
Take
but
care
I
of
don't
these.
see that it helps.
Anybody that needs a parking validation, can see me, I'll open the chat.
Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you in May, and some of you may be at the May 4th meeting.